Founders are obsessed with their companies by default, and that obsession can be an incredible source of energy and motivation just through its sheer intensity. But when it comes time for a founder to build a team around them, how important is it for the others to match that intensity? Can one go too far? How does one build a culture of intensity without burning out? Those are the questions that we explore in today's coaching session with Olga Chin, the founder and CEO of Interprice Technologies. If this is your first time here, I'm Brian Wang, the host of this show, and I'm also an executive coach who helps founders grow by working through their biggest challenges. On this show, we have one-time coaching sessions where you will hear things that my clients never say elsewhere because they're working through real-life current issues. I ask everyone who comes on this show to dig deep and trust that by the end, they will learn something new about themselves and gain new insight on how to move their business forward. Okay, let's dive in. Hey, Olga, it's great to see you today.
Good to see you too. Thanks, Brian, for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to speak a little bit to the audience, Olga, you're Olga Chin. You're the founder CEO of a company called Interprice. And you and I, we've known each other for, I want to say a couple of years now. And I'm really excited to get on this session with you. And I just want to hand it to you and just ask, based off of our previous conversation, what you wanted to bring in and what you really want to take a look at today.
I'm excited as well. So, Brian, one of the things that you and I spoken in the past about is when you are a founder, especially when you're a solo founder, the company is your baby. You are obsessed. I use this word obsession quite a bit. You think about it all the time, but yet you're building a team around you that's maybe not as obsessed with the company as you are, which is completely healthy. And we can talk about how that equates to sports later on. But I want to talk about a couple of different aspects. So first of all, how do you build a healthy team knowing that you're the person who's thinking about the company all the time, 24/7? Mm-hmm. But also, how are you then managing this obsession? Because the buck ultimately stops with you in almost every situation. And I think it's relevant to pretty much every founder I know.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Pretty much every founder I know has a certain level of obsession with the business, for better or for worse. And so I hear you talking a little bit about how that obsession shows up, and you notice that it's different than how others treat the business and the attitudes that they bring. There's two things that you spoke to. One is like, how do you manage a team, like a healthy team, given the obsession, and how do you like manage the obsession itself? I'm wondering. It sounds like there might be a couple of different threads there. Which thread is feeling more salient for you right now?
Maybe let's start with the latter one. So let's unpack the founder journey. Yeah. Right? Because you're the founder, you have this obsession with your company. Some of the best founders I know tell me that the best ideas come to them in the shower, which means that you're thinking about it when you're in the shower, which is entirely true. There are several instances that I can recite to you when I woke up at night thinking about the company and I dream about it. So there's obsession. As long as it doesn't become addiction, it's actually healthy because you are this invested. So it's similar to almost like a child in a way, because that's you're just constantly thinking about it. But you're pretty much the only one. Most of the time, yes, you have employees and the team, and I have partners in the company. But there's a lot of pressure, and it can feel quite lonely, I want to say.
Yeah. And so that loneliness that you're describing, is that part of what makes the obsession challenging, or is it something else?
I think it's a little bit more of the fact that ultimately the buck stops with you. So I always, it's funny because when I started the company, I never used to watch sports or be into sports. But somebody gave me this analogy in the past, and I think about this a lot. And so I've actually started reading up on this, but it's like leading a sports team. So think about, a football team. You are the quarterback. The problem is that you're also a little bit of a coach too. And so when you watch a game and the team wins, most of the time they talk about the quarterback. And if the team loses, most of the time they talk about the quarterback's mistakes. It's the same kind of pressure for the founder.
So we started this conversation talking about the obsession, and now we're talking about pressure. So in listening to you, I'm curious about, what are you trying to figure out at the moment? Like I hear like a lot of these things that are very familiar to me, that are pretty present in a lot of founder experiences, but I'm curious for you specifically, Olga, like what are you trying to figure out at the moment?
How do you take all of this, the pressure and the obsession, and how do you create a healthy work environment for the rest of your team? Right? So, how do you create this football team where you are the quarterback, you are partially a coach,
Yeah.
and you lead a team? And a lot of times you have to have the mental strength to deal with it,
Yeah.
but you also want to make sure that the team is functioning. And when they look at you and they see that you're spending 24/7 on your company, how do you ensure that their minds are healthy and they see you as a healthy leader
Yeah.
versus somebody who's maybe just a little crazy?
What is it about them seeing you be obsessive that would lead them to be an unhealthy team?
I think there's good obsession, there's bad obsession, right? Obsession with the company is good as long as it does not become addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And good obsession means, look, taking even a step back, right? When a person joins a startup to work with a startup, most of the time they're betting on the founder, they're betting on the company, and there's a very certain persona that joins it. But they want to see your energy as the founder. They want to see that you're invested. That's partially why people join startups. That's partially why investors invest in startups. They
Right.
want to see this energy. This energy can be very contagious. But if you take it past a certain point, so for example, if you expect everybody else to be thinking about this 24/7, then it's just not a healthy environment, right? So there's a very fine line there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I get all of that conceptually. So I want to locate where you are, Olga. Like when you think about the spectrum of healthy versus unhealthy obsession, where would you place yourself relative to that line?
I think it can swing both ways. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what can I do outside of work to get my mind off of this, how not to have a knee-jerk reaction when something either good or bad happens, and maintain kind of a very steady pace, thinking that it's a marathon and not a sprint, that
Yeah.
nothing is an overnight success. So you definitely, you can obsess all you want, but ultimately it's a long game that you're playing. I had to learn a couple of different things for myself. So yeah, I guess that's kind of where I'm at. So I'm not sure if I think it's fairly healthy from that perspective. I have tons of energy when it comes to that. I want to succeed, but I would say, and I hope many people relate to this, it is quite lonely.
I'm already, yeah, I'm hearing you and you're saying all the ways in which you want to create some distance, not be too like taken in by the journey or the experience, which I think a lot of founders ultimately find themselves in that place. And yet I'm also noticing that you're going back to the loneliness piece, right? Just like being in that sort of sole position of the one who cares the most. Can you just speak a little bit more about what that's like for you personally?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So I do have a couple of partners uh, that have started the company with me. So I wouldn't say that I'm entirely lonely. I do have a lot of support. I also am very lucky to be married to somebody who can actually listen about this.
Great.
Although it's interesting, there are days when I want to talk about it, and there are days when I just want to just be by myself.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. But in terms of loneliness, I think it comes down to that every decision, even if we vote and do things by consensus, ultimately the decision rests with me.
Hmm.
So if we decide to do something, if we decide to launch a new product, if we, have a tough negotiation with a customer and we, figure out price one way or another, ultimately at the end of the day, I have the full responsibility.
Hmm.
And if things go right, try to give credit to the team. But I have this big belief that if things go wrong, and I talk about this actually a lot when we hire people, if things go wrong, it is on me.
Mm.
And everybody knows that it's 100% on me. And that's the responsibility that you take on when you're a founder. It doesn't mean that it's easy day to day.
What's it like for you just to reflect on that right here? Just like the sense that it all kind of is at your feet.
You know what? It's interesting because when I talk about it, it's not actually as hard as it seems. Maybe you just get so used to it. I think at the end of the day. Yeah.
It's funny, yeah, when it's like the water that you swim in, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal when that's your day-to-day reality. Yeah.
That's true. And there's also, one of the things that I learned is that there are only so many decisions that you make and so many choices that you make as a founder during the course of the company's life that are just incredibly important. Everything else is kind of like it affects the course trajectory a little bit, but it's not a make it or break it. And funny enough, one of the things that I keep thinking about, especially this year, is that when I first started the company and Dylan joined, my chief product officer joined, we made one product decision without going into specifics that we literally, I'll never forget, we were just literally sitting, on the phone one day and be like, hey, why don't we try this? Brian, that is what made Interprice into what it is right now. And if you had asked me that day, I would have thought there was such minutiae details.
Yeah, it's often the case that we can't predict what certain decisions will lead to down the line. Yeah, it's wonderful to reflect on that, and at the same time, I'm wondering right now, Olga, as we've been kind of talking about all of this, where do you want to go next? Like we've touched on a few different things, and I sense that we're sort of in this still kind of like reflective mode, but where do you want to go now? Like where do you want?
What about the people though? Because that's the most important piece, right? So my team sees me making these decisions. They're very supportive.
Yeah.
Some decisions are easy. Some decisions are tough.
Yeah.
And we have good days and we have bad days, just like any company. But how do you create this really, really healthy environment where first of all, the team has to trust you, and you're the one person who is obsessed and you're making these decisions and you care about the company so much, you're thinking about this 24/7, but you do not require your team to do that. And yet you have to give them enough of your energy every single day to keep going.
You've mentioned this a few times now, like how do you create a healthy team? And I want to ask you, what is it in your experience right now that's making you ask the question? Meaning like, I hear you ask it as if you don't already know.
I guess some of it is, let's pretend that I'm hiring somebody.
Yeah.
Right. And they say, well, what kind of culture do you have? And it's like, well, we're a startup. We work a lot.
Yeah.
But you don't have to necessarily. We only care about the output. But we don't want them to get scared. Right. Because we want to have this culture where people are not afraid to experiment. People are not afraid to have lives outside of work. But at the same time, we are also incredibly driven. We are all ex-bankers. So if you ever watch any of these TV shows, bankers, lawyers, they work a lot of hours and your stamina becomes incredibly high to working a lot.
Yep.
And fortunately or unfortunately, my core group of business and product folks are ex-bankers.
Okay.
And so we tend to work a lot. It's very demanding. And we also have a lot of high stamina. So going back to like the sports analogy, I often think about, when a team is training, right? And you recruit team players. Well, I've managed to, in my core group of partners, recruit people who've been training for like Ironman. and the problem is that those are the kinds of athletes that just have such high stamina and grit. But when you hire folks for various other roles, you're not necessarily going to get people like that. And that's totally okay. But how do you work together?
Okay, so that feels like we're going into a little bit of a different question, but it sounds like you're saying, given that much of the core team is that sort of Ironman athlete, and as we hire for various roles that might not require that sort of level of stamina, grit, drive, how do you bring in people that work a little bit differently in a way that where like they work well together. Is that a fair
I think it's a fair
summation?
statement. And let's actually give one example. So my partner Dylan wakes up at I think 4 o'clock in the morning every day. He checks all his email for I think a good hour. So I can expect 4 o'clock emails from him or
Yeah.
Slack messages. Then he goes to do his CrossFit exercise.
Yeah.
And then he comes back and he's online at 6 and he pretty much works through the evening. Now imagine another team player joining and seeing this pattern. And unfortunately, Dylan and I have had several conversations at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's not unusual for us to actually do this.
Yeah.
But as much as it's really good in terms of productivity, and because we're so driven and everybody cares so much, it's not necessarily what everybody else wants to do.
Okay. So going back to that original question of like, how do you create a healthy team given that you and other people on your team operate with this level of obsession and intensity? Mm-hmm. If I were to interpret, it sounds like you don't want to send a message that is what was required. 4 a.m. emails, 6 a.m. Work, working throughout the night. Like it sounds like that's not the message that you want to send to your people. Yeah.
Not at all. And in fact, if somebody's up at 4 o'clock in the morning as well, we would think it's very weird. So we don't, it's not only is it not expected, we don't anticipate that.
So what is the message that you want to send to the people that you're hiring at the company?
That it's an inclusive environment. We care a lot about intellectual stimulation and the output, but it's not necessarily, our culture is very much ex-banker culture, very, very driven, very driven. Yeah.
So it sounds like two things at once. We have a lot of bankers here. The culture is informed by that. We're driven, and we're inclusive. We're open to different ways of working, is what I heard you say.
Yes.
And what makes that statement not enough for the question of how do you build a healthy team?
Because the team is still going to see us on Slack with a green button at 4 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, do you hide that or not really? And so we have done a lot of team building events, so people know us very well. I know everything about the personal stuff from most employees, right?
Well,
so we try.
Sorry to jump in here, but so I hear you. You make that statement like you want to be inclusive. You're also like acknowledging that there's a certain working style that a lot of people here take. So let's just say, I'm just gonna be very like on the nose about it. So let's say you say all that, and then you're telling teammates, hey, you will see us probably up at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. or whatever working. And I don't want you to take that to mean that you need to be working right now. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that that's what you need to say, but let's just pretend that that's what happened. Why would that not be sufficient in communicating what you're trying to communicate or setting the culture that you're trying to set here?
Because it's do as I say, not do as I do kind of principle, right? Because you're saying one thing and you're sort of doing another. But the flip side of that, Brian, so let's talk about the other piece of it. What I mentioned is that when somebody joins a startup, usually they join because of the founder and the vision and the market, and they see this thing succeeding. I don't think anybody really joins just because, you get a paycheck and that's about it. Startups tend to attract a certain breed of people.
Sure.
And that's a well-known fact. What if they see the opposite situation? What if the founder is not obsessed and kind of like checked out, right?
Generally not a good sign.
It's not a good sign, right? And so as much as I think a lot about kind of how do I not overwhelm people with all this energy and constantly like I have all these ideas, like if I think of something at 11 o'clock at night, I might actually post it on Slack saying, hey, what do you guys think about it? And that's the energy that I want to give to my people, that I'm fully invested in it, Does it mean that they have to respond to me at 11 o'clock at night? No, absolutely not. So you're balancing out these two things, and that's very difficult.
So here's what I'm curious about. Like, what would happen? What do you think would happen on your team if you were to say, look, I'm going to work really hard. Some people on this team are going to work really, really hard. That's going to be represented by working at lots of hours, right? Just like we talked about. And also, I want you to find your own pace. And you simply allowed them to figure that out by themselves. And I get the part about do as I say, not as I do component. But let's say you just experimented with that. You made that statement, and then you kind of went about the next few weeks working it the way you normally do, and then you allow others to work the way they want to do. Like, what do you think would happen on the team?
I don't think it would change anything right now. I think it only matters really for new hires or like some of the newer folks.
Okay.
I believe that most of the existing people already know kind of where the working style is. In fact, there was a funny story. One of my partners, Anne, she mentioned to me something recently. She said, I wake up at 7 o'clock and I check Slack to see what Olga posted at 5. And it comes out funny, but it's actually true.
Yeah, they can laugh about it. They know you.
Oh yeah, no, they know exactly what's going on. But I think it scares some of the newer hires. So when we try to build the team, initially that's the tough piece. So it might be something that just needs to be communicated individually until people trust me. So the longer they're in the company, they trust what I actually say.
It sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the fear is that you'll say, hey, you don't need to work these hours that I work, but people will still see that you're working all these hours, and that they're going to be scared, because you use that word. Like, it sounds like you're concerned that they're going to be scared and they will feel like pressured that they have to work that many hours.
Yeah.
And then that's what you don't want. Is that accurate?
That's right. But I still want the productivity.
Yeah, so that's interesting because part of what I hear is that there's a part of you that does want them to be working really hard, and a part of you that doesn't want them to like get burned out or to overdo it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is very accurate. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what comes up for you as I just point out the fact that there's a little bit of an internal conflict on your end about this?
My first gut reaction is that maybe that barometer is a very personal thing for each individual, where they want to be on that scale. Like how much can they put in versus the productivity, and how much can they get back, right? And that's going to depend on so many different factors for each individual person. And so maybe there's no consistent message, that everybody kind of has to figure it out for themselves. Is that fair? That was my gut reaction when you said that. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter if I think it's fair. What do you think as you're saying that?
I think that's probably true, because everybody's motivated by different things. And everybody has a very different situation personally. And there are some times when somebody can put in more, somebody can put in less. There are some days when somebody is more focused versus another days. And that's a very individual specific thing.
What I hear is that you're acknowledging that people will vary a lot in terms of what they need, what they want, how hard they want to work. And some sense that you can trust that they'll figure it out on their own.
Maybe just, yeah, I think so. I think maybe it's an individual thing, and it's not a one day type item too. Because when I focus on new hires, the reason I'm doing this is because when somebody first comes in, yes, they probably buy into the vision and mission. Otherwise, they wouldn't have accepted the offer. But for them to trust me, to trust the rest of the team, that will take a little bit of time. And that's a very mutual thing, by the way. Sure. Very normal. So as they build this trust, perhaps they have to figure out where on the scale, how much they can handle of this team, right? Or this marathon. How fast can they push themselves? So as you think about, again, going back to sports, like if somebody is running a marathon, it's their choice and their ability. in terms of how fast and how much you push yourself, how much you train for that, and what you want as an outcome.
Although I want to challenge that for a moment, though, right? Because marathons are individual. It's an individual race. Each individual is kind of trying to beat their own time, right? But you're working on a team. And so the work that one person does is going to impact the rest of the team as well. So what happens when you have some people who are, working double duty and really pushing the envelope, and others who are sort of hanging back because they've decided that they're just going to work at a different pace? What does that end up looking like for the team and for you?
I think that the people who decide to work double time get more responsibility, more rewards, I guess, better positions. And the interesting part is that in a company you need to have a balance, right? And if we had everybody who was working 24/7, I think that would be an insane asylum here at Enterprise, just because it's just not healthy in every kind of way. And so this balance, this diversity of working styles and preferences, I think it's actually really, really helpful.
But I also hear, though, that you value the whole working double duty, pushing the envelope side of things. You talked about rewarding people, getting more opportunity, getting more promotions.
Right, but I would be careful, though, because it's not just the hours, right? So it's about productivity.
Say more about that. What does that mean to you?
We care about the output. We actually have it in our company. We call it company ethos as we publish this. And so it's about productivity. So everybody's responsible for a particular project. We're a pretty small team still. So it's about 30, 40 of us, and everybody's responsible for their own piece. And we talk about that a lot, like accountability. It doesn't matter how long it takes a person to get things done. But if somebody wants to move up and advance, and we've had situations where that actually happened like very, very quickly, if they finish their project within a shorter amount of time, they can take on more, they can help the team. And that's actually happened quite a bit.
Yeah. So it sounds like one aspect is you really value output, right? Like output over time, if we use a crude measure of output over time as productivity.
That's right. But the problem in a startup is that there's always more that we can do. Always.
That's right.
The work doesn't end.
So far, you've talked a little bit about how there's always more to do, and you value people who will be very productive, create a lot of output, and that on some level, having folks who are working a little bit less intensely is a good thing as it creates some balance on the team, creates a healthier environment. And it's somewhere like there's like a kind of like a gray, it's not black or white, right? It's like you don't want all crazy intensity across the team. You don't want everyone to be very laid back. You want to be, somewhere in the middle. So I guess if we tie it back to that question of how do you create a healthy team when obsession and high productivity are things that are really important aspects, where are you now on that question?
So we actually have a fairly good balance, to be honest, in terms of the core group of folks. I would say some of it has to do with mutual respect. Some of it probably has to do with the openness. So I'm really, really transparent. Besides salaries and things like that, open book, completely open book with a team. And I think that's helpful because then if I am pinging, at 11 o'clock at night, all these ideas, then the team knows where it's coming from. So it's not just some random thought that I have. And so they always know, like, this is what led to Olga saying all this. So I think it's about mutual respect. And that's not something that you get overnight, I think. And so for some of the core veterans, because if you think about how, like, for example, somebody like Dylan joined Enterprise before I even went full time, a couple of weeks before, but still it's before. The amount of respect and trust there is pretty huge.
Because he took that risk?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And when somebody new joins that I didn't know before, it takes a while to build that trust, build that level of respect. once you do, I think everybody's kind of on the same page. And at the same time, they prove that, like, I see where they are in terms of the output of what they want to do. So it's really helpful. But being patient during that first onboarding, that's hard too. As you're exploring different like ways of working together.
What I'm hearing from you is that transparency and respect are pretty critical ingredients for creating a healthy environment for your team, and that doesn't come for free, doesn't come from the beginning. It requires time investment. It requires a process where people spend this time together to feel each other out, calibrate, and so on and so forth.
I think so. And I think that me translating that into the company culture as well is important, because now that we're talking about, one of the things that I mentioned is I have this group of original gangsters, as I call them. So these guys have been with Interprice since day one. They know everything that's going on without their roles being super defined, just because they were the original folks. And what sometimes happens is that when new folks join, we can kind of fix everything pretty quickly within this original group, right? Without letting the person figure it out. And so it's not just about me, it's kind of translating that throughout the company, that we have this culture that's incredibly driven, but it's all about the output, and you have to be respectful and develop this mutual trust, because mutual trust development is maybe the primary goal here. And maybe not, it's not even the output.
A little lost. Can you just repeat what you said?
So I guess teaching the folks and coaching them that when we're building out the team, and as we even work on being a team, this respect and trust building amongst everybody in the company, and not just me, it's not just me to a person. I think that's really important. And vocalizing that.
Okay.
That it's like a goal.
Trust and respect. Yeah. Okay. So trust and respect are really critical for team health. And with yourself, what's coming up for you? Where are you in this question? What feels like it's not resolved right now?
I think what's coming up for me is that I think transparency has actually helped me quite a bit with that. So I literally run it in the most transparent way. We have company meetings every Thursday, and I lay it out in terms of our developers know like where we're in terms of customer contracts. Like it's a very open book. And I thought sometimes that maybe I don't ever need to do that, right? Because I've never worked in organizations that did that. So why would I have to do that? But when a couple of months ago, we had a situation where something in the product had a bug, and I had to call one of the main developers on it and get him to stay, pretty late to work on it and fix it. But he understood, my team understood right away, like why I'm asking that, because I've talked about what this means. And I think that that's actually what created the trust, is this transparency that maybe they didn't necessarily need. But
because like they did need it. It sounds like that transparency provides the context and the understanding of why they need to work late in the first place.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's there are no questions, and they all understood. And I think that a big part of it too is creating this empathy, that why do I care? I want them to understand why I care. Because I have customers that I love, and I care about the customers. So it's all, at the end of the day, it's all about our clients. And I want to make sure that it translates throughout the organization. And so it's not just me being obsessed for the sake of being obsessed. There's this mission.
So let's say that you were to communicate that to your team over and over and over again. Transparency, here's why we care about this, here's why it matters, here's why we're doing what we're doing. How would that impact this whole thing that you're talking about around people are going to work too hard or not hard enough, or it's going to be unclear? Like if you simply just were as transparent as you could be about why you're doing what you're doing all day long, how would that impact things?
Well, you make it sound really simple.
I didn't say it was simple.
But the reality is, I think it would have two different effects, right? So if people on my team who don't necessarily talk to customers all the time hear this feeling that that's what I'm experiencing, that's why I'm doing this, then they're free to make their own decisions how obsessed they want to be, right? And I'm empowering them to make that decision to based on where they are in their life. And at the same time, by talking to them why I'm doing this and why this matters, then they can calibrate where they are in that productivity scale and where they need to be. Because it's not just about, hey, I want to just check the box.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm essentially putting that responsibility on them, and they're free to make their decision.
I like what you said around empowerment, because just to reflect for a second, it sounds like a couple of things I'm picking up. One is when you provide this context around the customers, especially for people who don't have a lot of contact with that, with them, when you explain the context, what matters or why it matters, or even when you are transparent about what gets rewarded at enterprise, what doesn't get rewarded, you're essentially giving your team and new hires the relevant information that they need in order to make fully informed decisions. So
And
another way of describing that is empowerment.
Yes, and I think that I'm also taking that pressure off of myself.
How do you mean?
Because instead of me deciding what to tell this person in terms of the work hours or not, what I'm doing is I'm telling them why this matters to me and how much this matters and what the mission is, and here are our clients and why they care. And it's up to the person to decide where they want to be in this company, assuming that they get their job done, of course, right? So there's minimal requirements there that they have to meet, but it's their decision and not mine. And all I can do is tell them that I'm okay regardless of their work structure, style, or, however they want to do it. But then I'm taking that load off of my shoulders.
Yeah, so I want to just invite you to take a moment right here, present moment, to see what that feels like, to take that load off, because you've laid it all out.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because then I'm no longer thinking about dictating how somebody works and what they do. Yeah.
The feel for you right now.
It's a little easier.
Yeah, just a little bit.
There's also a level of human empathy, I think, there, in terms of this empowerment and me. I like being transparent with a team, because I want them to fully understand where it comes from, like where deep down inside my heart it comes from. And I think that I've done that, but what you're showing me is that there's another layer where I'm giving them all this information, not just so that they have empathy and understand clients, but so that they can see where they are on the on this map, like where they are on the team.
And so when they have all that information, then they can decide for themselves.
Yes, knowing that I have their back no matter what.
So go back to this original question of how do I make sure my team is healthy when there's all this obsession on it? How does that question sit with you right now?
I think that as long as I tell them why, how, then I'm harnessing the positive effects versus dictating what everybody does, in which case it becomes negative, right? But I like the obsession concept. I like the energy of it. I think it's really important.
Yeah, your job isn't to tell people how obsessed they ought to be. Your job is to simply share how committed, how obsessed you are currently, and what will be rewarded here, and allow them to make a choice. And so long as that decision is in their hands, not in yours, then that weight that you mentioned that's on your shoulders can be just a little bit lighter because you're not carrying that decision for them.
Yes, and then the flip side is that we started out this conversation talking about how it's lonely being a solo founder and how every decision is yours. But maybe this one doesn't have to be mine.
Very nice. Just gonna let that one hang out for a second. Yeah, so just we're gonna start to wrap here. So take a moment to take in what we just explored, and I want to ask you, what's the main takeaway for you, Olga?
I think the main takeaway is that the transparency that you're allowing your team to have probably has more benefits than I realized when we started this conversation. I knew going into it that talking about, the founder obsession, I wasn't going to say that it's a bad thing because I truly believe that it's not. That's why startups exist. But at the same time, I think I would imagine that most people realize why founders do this. And if you're just giving people benefit of doubt and creating this transparency and talking about why and how, I imagine that it probably empowers people more than I originally thought.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to see how that unfolds for you as you really practice that.
Appreciate it.
All right, Olga, it was a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much,
Brad.
Brad.
It. One of the things that really struck me in the session was that sense of loneliness that comes with being a founder. It's this feeling like you're responsible for every single thing that happens in the business. And as a former founder myself, I totally get that. I think part of what made this experience harder than it needed to be for Olga was the tension of embracing intensity and not wanting to scare off employees who don't necessarily want to make work their everything. Olga internalized that tension by taking responsibility for how her employees worked, even if just implicitly. But when she leans on transparency to create trust and help her team understand the why behind her own actions, she ultimately empowers her team to find their own balance. Now Olga doesn't need to be responsible for all their choices. She can leave it up to them. And with that, find some relief. Thank you for listening to Slow Down to Speed Up. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate it in your favorite podcasting app or give it a like and subscribe on YouTube. And if you're a founder looking to reach the next level through coaching or you'd like to come onto the show, please reach out to me at dashingleadership.com.